I could tell you a beautiful story about this place, about the school of Aholehole that gathers just below the surface in the tide pool, or about the Honu my friends saw every day growing up there. But after spending time here, the first thing I see now is what's beneath the surface. And I don't mean that literally. I mean the people who call the North Shore of Oahu home and have spent over 20 years showing up day in and day out to care for this place. It's how this dedicated community now knows there's an extraordinary biodiversity in this protected area, with more than 80 fish, 27 invertebrates, 13 corals, and dozens of native limu, or seaweed species. And it's how the state now understands there is an undeniable human impact that needs to be addressed, from unregulated tourism to sewage runoff. And yet, our funding systems often struggle to recognize and support this ongoing stewardship. And that challenge is becoming more urgent as federal funding for climate and environmental programs grow increasingly uncertain. So my capstone asks, how can donors help these organizations keep showing up year after year? And that question took me to the North Shore of Oahu. This is the Pupukea Marine Life Conservation District, or MLCD for short. It includes Waimea Bay, Kalua'omaua, or Three Tables, and Kapo'o, also known as Sharks Cove, up in the north. It's one of 3 marine protected areas on the island, and on paper, it has the highest level of state marine protection, with rules that prohibit most fishing and take. But for protection to mean something in practice, someone has to keep showing up. And that someone is actually a group of community members who have come together to form Malama Pupukea Waimea, or MPW, in 2005. They're a lean and dedicated grassroots nonprofit that has co-managed this MLCD with the state for over 2 decades. And their work touches nearly every part of making this protected area function in practice, from educating visitors to conducting in-water monitoring that tracks reef health to advocating for stronger protections at the Capitol. As Uncle Bob, a founding member of the organization, says, this is the work of a lifetime. Everything about this work is long-term and relational. And without them, the Pupukea MLCD wouldn't exist to be what it is today. But MPW and many other grassroots organizations are constrained by and get stuck in this funding pattern. A grant supports a new project, that project produces a deliverable, and the organization submits a report on project outcomes. And on paper, that can look successful. Let's take a coral restoration project, for example. A grant might measure success by the number of corals outplanted. But that number isn't really the end goal, is it? The goal is to ultimately fund and support a more resilient ecosystem. But resilience isn't created overnight, and it certainly isn't built within a typical 1 to 3 year grant cycle. It takes dedication and persistence. It takes people showing up time and time again, even after the initial project is over, to monitor what survives, maintain the site, and adapt as conditions inevitably change. And that's the gap I'm trying to address here. Before I get into how donors can sustain stewardship, let me explain what that looks like in practice. You probably already know where this is going, but at MPW, the answer isn't a single project or program. It's a reinforcing loop that has been building for over 20 years. And it starts with stewardship presence. People showing up consistently over time, fostering a deep relationship to and knowledge of the place. At MPW, this presence includes longtime residents and volunteers who know where certain fish tend to aggregate in the tide pools, how ocean and wind conditions shift across the year, and what feels different from one season to the next. And that also includes passing that knowledge down to the next generation through their youth education program, helping build a sense of kuleana, or responsibility for the place. And over time, MPW's practice of place-based observation, or KILO, along with Western monitoring, has accumulated a record of the ecosystem and the pressures affecting it. And that monitoring transforms observation into evidence. It's how MPWs and its partners have documented a 700% increase in human visitation from 2012 to 2021. It's how they can show that fish biomass inside the MPA is 2.5 times higher than in adjacent unprotected areas. And it's how they connected high human use in the tide pools with declines in fish abundance. And that evidence builds credibility. And over time, that credibility opens doors. It helped pass legislation to fund a 3-year carrying capacity study focused on understanding human use impacts and informing improved management of the MLCD. And to Sid's point earlier, the management plan can be so important in formalizing that MPA designation. And that's exactly what this group of community members did when they co-authored the first comprehensive MLCD management plan with the state. And those partnerships and resources create more capacity for stewardship. At MPW, the people and relationships are what keeps the work moving between these funding cycles. They're not separate from the solution. They are the foundation of it. And now that I understood what stewardship looks like, I set out to explore how donors can help MPW and other organizations keep showing up year after year and fund the continuity that sustains that loop that I just showed you. And I approached that question in 3 ways. First, I developed a case study to help donors understand how to fund stewardship through MPW's experience. And to do this, I reviewed MPW's internal and published documents, conducted a literature review on conservation finance, and traveled to the North Shore of Oahu to interview stakeholders, including funders, residents, business owners, and basically anybody who wanted to talk to me to better understand the local partnerships MPW can engage in. And as a result of those interviews, I developed a partnership engagement tracker that identified local opportunities to help them strengthen and grow its funding and in-kind support, which is more important now than ever. And lastly, I conducted large area imagery fieldwork to create orthomosaics, which are these 2D top-down views of the reef stitched together from images my chair, Bert, and I collected out in the field. And this builds on imaging work started last year by an alumni and addresses MPW's goals to help develop a visual time series of changing reef conditions in the MLCD. And together, these 3 pieces help me explore the same questions, but from different angles. Today, I'm going to focus on what I learned through the case study. What I realized pretty quickly after landing and interviewing people is that the funding solution I was looking for isn't necessarily technical as it is relational. And one of the clearest examples came from Patagonia, Hawaii, which has been a long-term partner of MPW. Their stores are given autonomy over how they deploy their activism grants, and both Oahu stores work together to decide which organizations to support. Paul, one of the members on the team, described their whole approach as kind of a mirror to Hawaiian culture, relationship-based at its core. They'll visit an organization on their own time with no agenda, just to understand the work. And they don't see themselves as experts on what to fund, the communities are. And so the money comes unrestricted. And what really stood out to me was how he described money as decoupled from partnership. Their relationship with an organization isn't limited to writing a check, but if funding is most useful, they can provide the capital. They also, but if an organization needs volunteer time, gear, or event space, that partnership can shift towards providing that instead. They shared an example where a grantee once told them, "We actually don't need the funding this year. What we need is people on the ground to help out on the farm." And because the relationship is strong enough for that kind of honesty, they were able to provide the funding to other organizations in need instead. And I saw this reflect across the interviews that I had across the North Shore businesses and funders as well. Because they were already in the community, that trust was there. And trust really, from what I've learned in the short amount of time that I was there, is the currency in which they operate on. And even though they might not know everything there is to know about what MPW does programmatically, they were willing to step in and help in whatever way they needed. They trusted that they knew what they needed to do. So they would set up recurring donations from profits from the store, or provided event space, and just opened their doors to other networks. And from interviews like this, I distilled 3 recommendations for donors broadly defined as foundations, local businesses, individual contributors, and community partners. The first is to deepen partnerships. Project grants can be useful for launching new projects, or to get a feel for how an organization, early on in a partnership. But once an organization has earned your trust, let that relationship grow. Go on a site visit, set up an informal check-in, participate in a volunteer day. Because I guarantee you, talking to anyone on the team for 5 minutes will help you understand so much more than what can be captured in a grant report. Second, support the people holding the work. Like I said earlier, MPW's greatest asset is not any one program. It's the people, the relationships, and the knowledge built over 20 years. That capacity needs sustaining, whether through unrestricted funding, equipment, volunteer time, or event space. One example is MPW's partnerships with universities. What started off as a relationship with one scientist or professor has grown into a pipeline of students and researchers who continue contributing to monitoring efforts year after year, myself included. And lastly, fund monitoring. In MPW's case, fund in-water monitoring. To outsiders, this can look repetitive, but repetition is the point. That information becomes useful as it accumulates over time. When I first started working in finance, I was taught to be objective, to remove emotion from the work, to focus on the numbers and let those numbers speak for themselves. And that discipline matters. But working in conservation with communities like MPW has taught me that rigor doesn't always have to mean distance. There is a way to marry both. And from what I've learned here, it's essential to do so. Otherwise, you miss seeing the conditions that make stewardship possible. For donors and partners, the goal is not just to write blank checks. It's about approaching funding conservation work differently, in a more relational way, so you can support the continuity that allows stewardship to continue. And lastly, I want to thank Malama Pupukeo Waimea for giving me the opportunity to work with them, to Josh and Jackie, who were so gracious in just introducing me to everybody, and their house became my second home while I was there, and it was just all in all an amazing experience. Thank you to my capstone committee, Bert, Samantha, Mike, and Jackie for your guidance. Thank you to Bert again and Callie on the MPW Marine Science team for making the field work happen in the 11th hour, basically. And to the Stand-in Lab, BZ and Nicole specifically, for teaching me all there is to know about photogrammetry and setting me up for success. Thank you all, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. Really interesting and thoughtful presentation and project. You mentioned a little bit about building a time series using photogrammetry. Can you tell us a bit more about what that is and any insights or lessons that emerged from your experience doing that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It was hard to integrate that into this case study that I wanted to share, but I pulled this from the Stand-in Labs website, and it basically shows a diver imaging the reef and the images being stitched together on the right. And so that's basically what we did, except snorkeling, because the areas that we were imaging were too shallow. And so this in turn provides a really cohesive visualization of the environment, which can be further analyzed. And I'll just say that I didn't have very much time to get into the analysis portion of it, but that's something that I hope to get into later on. My main goal was just to get out there to image what we could and provide that for the team to use later on. But there are a lot of ways that you can do this. And then I also wanted to show, this is one of the orthomosaics. That was year 1 on the left and year 2 on the right. And just if you're not seeing like the obvious differences, I don't think you're supposed to, because a 2-year kind of trend isn't enough to really even show what that pattern is. But I mean, I thought there were some things that were really interesting, which is that some of these boulders, by the way, are humongous. And for you to see like those arrows that I'm pointing at, there's some movement in them from year to year. I think that's really telling of how much can actually change. And if you haven't traveled to the North Shore before, in the winter, they get these really insane swells. I think like Bert mentioned, like 40 feet or something. And so that inevitably is what I'm guessing makes all of this look different year to year. And then, okay, this is something that you didn't ask about, but I really wanted to show, because I put in a lot of effort into making this really basic 3D 3D projection of that exact site. And it's basically a fly through of Kapo'o Cove, Sharks Cove. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Bert has one.
Yeah, Sabrina, thanks so much. I really enjoyed working with you on this project, and I'm really thrilled with the outcomes and even the fact that we got into the water. maybe your classmates heard, but we had a lot of challenges getting you into the water and getting this data. So it's a really big accomplishment that we were able to get something at least. I was wondering, what was your biggest takeaway from, trying to plan and conduct field work and given all the challenges and everything? Did you have any lessons that you learned in that process?
Oh my gosh, you were the greatest teacher in that. In managing uncertainty. I mean, that's a part of field work. And before coming to Scripps, I participated in some, research programs where I was doing scientific diving, and that helped me prepare a little bit, but nothing like what this brought. And you were really helpful in reminding me that, we can only control what we can control. So let's just do that as best as we can and prepare for if we ever get the green light, then, we'll be ready to do that. So I think, managing uncertainty was the biggest thing. And with that comes patience, but also like a lot of preparation, over preparation perhaps. Thanks.